the knife into his stomach and he cut his stomach open. He was a serial killer. Paul sent for me. John, Paul wants to talk. So I got to my car, drove to his mansion. He had this super huge mansion. He had cameras all around it, and there were guys protecting him. I arrived, and there were stairs leading up to the second floor, where the big brown door was, and the big brown door was the door of his office. I arrived, I went upstairs, opened the door, and he was sitting behind the desk, smoking a cigarette. He had a white polo shirt on. He always had his glasses on. As I arrived, he pointed to the chair, and I sat on that chair. Didn't say a word. Then he looked up and said, "Tony, out." Then he leaned forward a little bit. You know the Gemini Club? The Gemini Club. It's Roy DeMeo's. See, Roy DeMeo was an acting captain under his captain Nino Gacci. He was a heavyweight guy. He brought thousands and thousands of dollars to the family every month. Stealing cars, they said he sold something like 200 cars a month. He had a precise method for stealing the cars. They had a big garage. They drove the stolen car to the garage. They changed the color. They changed the license plate. They changed the papers. And they sold it. They shipped the other cars to Kuwait. Mostly Kuwait. They said he was involved in heroin business and pornography. So he brought thousands of dollars to the family every month. But he was not famous for that, because so many people made that much money for the family. Roy DeMeo was famous for being the #1 hitman of the Gambino family. Period. Paul said, yes. Ever heard about a Gemini method? The Gemini method? No, Paul, I haven't heard about the Gemini method. Well, it's the best way to make someone you don't like or you don't want around disappear. See, John, unlike Roy DeMeo, he's a tough guy, he's loyal to me, and he's a bloodthirsty hound. I like him. I really do like him. But lately, he's been bringing in too much attention to the family. And I don't want feds at my ass on that level. Roy DeMeo is a bloodthirsty hound who got out of control. He's killing for fun. He's killing for the sake of killing. He's not asking for a pass to kill. So he's becoming a problem. And I want you to take care of that problem. Paul, you're asking me to take Roy DeMeo out? I don't want you to take him out. I want you to orchestrate the hit. I want you to plan it precisely and do it clean as fucking possible. Then he looked at me like this to see how would I react. And I said, Paul, Roy DeMeo is a make guy. Roy DeMeo is loyal to you. Roy DeMeo is a tough guy. What would you want to take Roy DeMeo out? Paul answered, a made guy. A made guy is loyal to the oath. A made guy doesn't cross the lines. A made guy doesn't murder for fun. A made guy doesn't bring that much attention to the family. Paul, I have to think about it. What is it to think about? Paul, he's not my friend. I don't know nothing about him. I don't hang out with him. I don't know how to get close to him. Then Paul interrupted me. I already took care of that. Then he stood up, walked me to the door, opened the door, and I left the room. I was walking downstairs, and God, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Roy DeMeo, wearing the black suit he always wore. He oiled his black hair all the way back. He was walking upstairs, and I was walking down. We met each other. I was shocked a little, but I tried to put on a face in order not to look suspicious. I left the mansion. I got close to my car. I opened the door. Then I hear someone saying, John. I turned back. It was Tommy Bloody. John, stay here. Why would I stay here? You gotta stay here. It's Paul's order. Here, in the car, In the car, in the mansion, wherever you want. But Paul doesn't want you to leave. He wants to talk to you. I was already in his office. 20-30 minutes passed. Tommy came down. John, Paul wants to meet you. I walked upstairs, opened the door. I see Paul Castellano on the top of the table. Sitting beside him was Roy DeMeo. Paul Castellano smiled as I opened the door. He pointed to the chair. John, please. Seemingly, Paul told Roy that John Gotti wants to be involved in the car business. So he wants to talk to you. He wants to talk to Nino Gacci. It was the plan. We talked about the car business. Then Roy DeMeo said I had to meet Nino Gacci. So he set up a meeting at a Gemini club. I asked him if we could do it in Bronx, but he insisted we had to do it in Gemini club. At 1 a.m. I went home around 11 p.m., changed my clothes, and I put my pistol behind my waist. It was the only backup I had. Around 11:45, I got in my car and I drove to the Gemini club. I arrived, I parked the car 100-200 meters away from the club. I opened the door, I stepped out, and as I was fixing my shirt and my tie, I see Roy DeMeo standing beside the door and waiting for me. We went in. Roy DeMeo was wearing his black suit. I saw Nino Gacci at one of them tables. Didn't bother standing up, so I went to his table, I shook his hand, and I sat down. Let me tell you something about Roy DeMeo. Roy DeMeo couldn't focus on what we were talking about. I felt his hand shaking when he had his whiskey in his hand. He was always looking around him. What was he nervous about? It was his place. He had his people around him. It was me and Nino Gacci. And even the bartender was his uncle, Joey. We talked till something like 4 a.m. till it was only 4 of us. Me, Roy DeMeo, Uncle Joey, and this blonde guy sitting at one of the tables. He looked 24, 25 years old. Since the moment that blonde kid sat on that table and started drinking, Roy DeMeo didn't pay no attention to what I was saying. He looked at Joey, did this. Joey came to the table, bring the gentleman a whiskey, it's on the house. Then when Joey brought the whiskey to the young guy, DeMeo looked at him and nodded. Joey went to the door, closed, and locked it. The blonde kid was so drunk he didn't know what was going on. Then I got a little nervous. I couldn't reach for my pistol. I didn't know what they were up to. Maybe DeMeo found out and he wanted to cut me into pieces. Maybe it was Paul Castellano's plan to feed me to Roy DeMeo. When I looked at DeMeo, I laughed and said, Roy, don't you think it's a little early to close a club?
Oh, I've got a surprise for you, John.
He looked at Joey once again, looked at a blonde kid, and Joey brought him a white towel. It was this big. We were sitting behind the blonde guy. Roy took the towel, stood up, walked to the guy, looked at me, and smiled. They looked at Joey. He smiled too. Want to see a magic trick? And he punched him in the face. Then he put the towel on his head, put the gun to his head, and fired it. Roy, what the fuck are you doing? Who the fuck is this guy? Let's say he was an informant. An informant? Did you have a pass to kill him? A pass? I'm not killing John Gotti. I'm killing a fucking rat. Joey, the bartender, was sharpening a knife. They grabbed the body, moved it to the basement. Then Roy came up. Wanna watch? Why not? I walked downstairs to the basement. Roy wrapped ropes around his ankles and pulled the poor guy up. The body was hanging upside down with a hole in his forehead, with a bullet inside his brain. Joey gave him the knife. So Roy put the knife to the guy's neck and cut these two veins, and blood started flowing out of his body. Then he put his hands on his shirt and ripped it off. Nice body. He poked the knife into his stomach and he cut his stomach open. And since he was hanging upside down, his guts came out of his stomach. It was disgusting to watch. DeMeo, who now had drops of blood on his face and his white shirt, pointed at me with the knife, looked at Joey and said, "You can walk Mr. Castellano out. I mean, Gotti."